So Baki Hanma is the son of Yujiro Hanma and Emi Akizawa. Since his birth, Baki has been training so that he may one day surpass his father Yujiro and earn his love. Baki's mother, Emi Akizawa, made sure that he had the most advanced training equipment around. She keeps providing him throughout his life with the best martial arts teachers, personal gym trainers, and sports equipment that money can buy. Also, his mother's employee, Hitoshi Kuriyagawa, is responsible for organizing the new duels for him. As he grew up, Baki eventually became famous in his hometown as the most feared punk around, as he beat up all the thugs he could find. This caused all the other thugs to make graffiti all over his house, because they could not hurt him physically. After a fight with Kitazawa and roughly 100 other gang members, Baki is upset that he only managed to take down 37 of them. The whole situation is watched by some friendly detective named Kido, who has been observing Baki for a long time and keeps following his actions. He then decides that his current training program isn't cutting it, and that he will try to increase his strength through his own means. Shortly afterward, Baki challenges 5 martial artists from his school. They are considered to be the elite among athletes. Baki's first opponent is a wrestler named Takemi Wakimoto. Baki beats him with one throw. The second opponent is a Toru Nishida, who is defeated by Baki with only a few punches. Baki then provokes the other 3 by calling them weaklings. A guy named Susumu Murakami attacks Baki and loses very fast. The same thing happens after a while with a sumo fighter, Katsutoshi Shibata. At the very end, a boxer named Fumihiko Hirao gives up the fight after one punch. He's the one who tells Baki about his next target. His new target is the boxing welterweight champion Yuri Tchaikovsky. He meets him for the first time while resting on a park bench, and he sees a man jogging who he recognizes to be Yuri. Soon Baki challenges Yuri to a match. Yuri agrees to fight Baki despite the age difference. Baki puts up a fight but is easily defeated by Yuri. The next day Baki leaves town and heads for a remote location to train so that he may become stronger. So, after losing his fight with Yuri, Baki wanted to get stronger. He decided to go to the mountain where he used to train with his father when he was a little kid. So the night before he leaves, he returns home to find the police chief there waiting. Then his mother arrives soon after to tell him she is proud of him and will help him in any way she can. Baki then travels to the mountains where he meets an old friend of his and his father's, named Raiki Andu. When Baki meets Andu, he lifts Baki with one hand and centers him in the palm of his hand. He looks at Baki and says, "I haven't seen a human in a year. Maybe I should eat you," all while licking his lips. It is not yet certain if he was joking or not. But Baki smiles and tells Andu that it is him. Andu realizes it and gives Baki a giant hug. Then he places Baki back on his feet with a big smile because he is so glad to see his old friend. Baki takes a bath in water from a river, refreshing himself. Baki looks up and sees an old tree and rushes through the forest to see it. When he gets there, he meets with Andu again and Andu explains the history behind the tree. Later that night, Andu and Baki sit down to eat dinner. After dinner, Baki asks Andu for a favor, which is to let him camp on Yasha Creek, where the Yasha ape has been seen roaming around. Andu is shocked. He tells Baki that he shouldn't go there, and it's a suicide. Andu continues to explain that the Yasha ape is no mere monkey. It's a monster that destroys all who oppose it, except for one man, who is Baki's father. He is the only man to have ever fought the beast and live, and even then he still took major damage. All others who tried to fight Yasha have never been heard from again. Baki says he didn't care. He knew what he was in for and he is trembling with fear but decides to go to fight the beast. So Baki goes there for camping, and while he's warming up, the Yasha ape appears and destroys his bench press bar. Baki then attacks him, but his blow had no effect, and with one blow the Yasha ape sends Baki flying through the air. Ando arrives with his axe, and then charges with it, and the ape catches the axe with his teeth and eats the blade. Then Andu throws a punch at the ape. Yasha catches it in his mouth and bites it down. Baki jumps in and kicks the ape. The ape sends him flying once more, and while Baki tries to get up, the Yasha ape grabs a hold of Andu's stomach and tears into it. Baki then lights the ape on fire and it runs for its cave. Baki gets Andu back to his house and tries to help him disinfect it before calling the emergency help, who takes Andu to the hospital. Before they pick him up, Andu pleads with Baki to do nothing stupid while he's away. Baki then prepares his training regime for a rematch. He eats as much as he can, like Andu says, so he can burn it into muscle. He then trains day and night for the near-death focus, which is increased when he jumps off a cliff and dodges all the obstacles. He also discovers how useful endorphins can be in his body. After that, he goes back to the cave and creates a ring of fire to fight the Yasha ape. He then begins to fight it out with the ape. When Andu returns, he runs to Baki's side only to see Baki, a 13-year-old boy, fight it out with and hold his own against the mighty monster, the Yasha ape. After Baki wins the fight, he goes to the home of the Yasha ape and returns the ape's wife's head that Baki's father killed. As thanks for the fight and the return of his wife's head, the Yasha ape gives Baki one of its fangs. Later, he returns home and learns that his rival Yuri was attacked and beaten by a yakuza named Kaoru Hanayama. Baki also learns that the gangster is a strong street fighter who wants to fight against him. He decides to take the matters into his own hands and comes to Hanayama's office to attack him. However, during the fight, the yakuza's desk flies out of the window and the duel is interrupted by police intervention. Anyway, Hanayama receives a strong kick that knocks him to the ground and brings him into a great rage. Since then, Baki's life has on the target of Hanayama. Soon afterward, Baki meets him in the mall and they start fighting again. From the very beginning of the battle, the gangster throws Baki out of the window and almost kills him. Fortunately, he catches some cable and returns to the top. He manages to survive all the best techniques of Hanayama, and in the end, Baki is declared the winner. But then suddenly his father, Yujiro Hanma, appears in the place of their fight. Yujiro provokes and brutally attacks Hanayama, knocks out his son, and then leaves. Shortly after these events, Baki visits Hanayama in the hospital and begins to establish a kind of brotherly relationship with him. Yujiro then decides to visit Baki during one of his training sessions. After a while, it turns out that the purpose of this meeting is only to provoke and anger his own son. He brings him as a gift the head of the dead Yasha ape, and then announces that he wants to fight Baki in a month. Baki flies into a rage and starts to despair because of what his father brought for him. Later on, Baki meets an American soldier named Jerry Stridham, who is his father's companion. Stridham tells him how to gain strength and experience. He comes up with the idea of sending him to Hokkaido, where some powerful soldiers are located. He tells him that he should experience the battlefield just like Yujiro. Baki agrees to his proposal and decides to face those soldiers. Together with Stridham, he flies to Hokkaido, and then with the help of a parachute he lands in the place where those strong soldiers are located. A moment after landing, he is attacked by them and tied to a tree. The 5 soldiers tell him that since he has already seen their faces, he should be killed. However, they decide to use his body as food. The soldiers want to leave him tied for a few days because this would get rid of all the feces and make his body taste better. However, in the night he manages to free himself from those ties and starts to fight with each of them. At first, he fights with Sanada, a soldier whose specialty is wielding a knife and aiming for the opponent's vital points. However, Baki overcomes him after a short fight. As soon as Baki deals the last blow to Sanada, he is attacked from behind by the next enemy, which is the Kuraishi, a specialist in combat with unusual resilience and great strength. During the fight, Kuraishi decides to drown him in a nearby river. Baki pretends to be really drowned, but after a while, he attacks him from behind and uses the rear naked choke. Thanks to this fight, Baki learns that there's no fair play on the battlefield. After this battle, Kuraishi tells Baki that among them is a really dangerous soldier named Gaia. He advises him to run away, but Baki is even more excited and ignores his words. The next opponent, Nomura, is found by Baki on his own. He is an average soldier with surprisingly miserable fighting skills. Baki defeats him in a blink of an eye. Later, Baki is attacked by the other 2 soldiers. These are Chiba twins, who are perfect at team fighting. Baki at first has small problems with them, but after a while, he starts to deal with them well. He's wondering if the 2 of them are Gaia. However, when the Chiba twins are defeated, the real Gaia is revealed. That's when Nomura gets a strange panic attack and starts to behave strangely. After a while, his true personality is revealed. It turns out that Nomura has a split personality, and Gaia is his alter ego. Baki starts a fight with him, and from the very beginning, he can't hit Gaia, who considers himself to be the god of the battlefield, and shows him his ability to control the level of adrenaline. After a while, Baki starts to use his own endorphins, but it is still not enough against Gaia, who begins to speak out his theories. He says that Baki's body is his own enemy, because he tortured it with training for years, and did not show it a shred of love. Baki eventually shows him that it's not true, and he finally starts hitting him with his attacks. However, eventually, Baki almost dies when Gaia uses his special techniques based on the use of the environment. He performs his vine art technique and tries to suffocate the young fighter who hangs from a tree, but Baki escapes. Gaia is angry because he's doing her best, and Baki is still alive. Eventually, Baki knocks out Gaia with an unusual movement that stops the flow of blood to the brain, giving Gaia an attack filled with love and not hurting his body. When Gaia wakes up, the 5 soldiers invite Baki to join them for a meal. Once again, Baki establishes a friendly bond with his opponents, who have made him stronger and taught him a lot. Then, Baki goes home and meets a master of swordsmanship named Kurokawa. The young fighter is a guest in Kurokawa's dojo and watches his incredible sword movements. Baki is delighted with his technique and speed, so he wants to challenge him. At first, Kurokawa refuses because he's afraid that Baki will die, but eventually the young Baki doesn't give up and forces Kurokawa to fight. Baki turns out to be faster and wins the fight with the roll kick to the face. After the battle, Kurokawa is invited to Baki's upcoming battle with Yujiro. A moment later, the young fighter meets Chinen, a master of the Kobayashi Ryu Kenpo. Chinen claims that his martial arts is the best. Once again, Baki wins the duel in the same way. Later it is shown that Baki is preparing for the battle and fights a few more nameless masters of martial arts. Shortly before the great battle with Yujiro, Baki meets his mother. Emi is in despair after a failed meeting with Yujiro and starts acting aggressively against Baki. She is devastated that Yujiro is unable to love her and begins to blame Baki for everything, stating that her son is just a mere weakling. At one point, even Emi's subordinate, Hitoshi Kuriyagawa, starts accusing her of behaving very badly towards her son. Baki tries to calm her down and hugs her. He asks her if she'll love him if he wins his fight against his father, but Emi bites his hand and runs away. After all this, Baki is devastated and meets Hanayama, who improves his mood. They spend time together in Baki's house and establish an even stronger relationship with each other. They both talk about their mothers, and at the very end, Hanayama wishes him good luck in his upcoming fight. The next day, Baki starts an intense warm-up before his battle with Yujiro. Baki starts to warm up at midday, and the fight is to take place at midnight. Kitazawa shows up and brings him the best thugs to train. Later, Yuri Tchaikovsky and Kaoru Hanayama also came. They're both helping Baki with warming up. Shortly before the start of the fight, all of Baki's friends arrive at the scene to watch his epic fight. Eventually, Yujiro himself also arrives by a helicopter. Gaia also arrives with him, who is beaten and kneels in front of the ogre in an act of respect for him. It turns out that shortly before Yujiro arrived, Gaia decided to attack the ogre and fight him, but he was brutally beaten by Yujiro. Baki and Yujiro's battle starts with a sudden earthquake. Baki's father stops it by hitting the ground, and then everyone is extremely astonished. Baki does his best in the battle, but it turns out that he has no chance at all. His attacks do not have any effect on Yujiro, even when he uses his roll kick trick. Nevertheless, the ogre is very satisfied with his son's combat level. At some point in their fight, Baki's body is crushed into the ground, and Yujiro begins to bombard him with a series of blows to his face when the young fighter is lying unconscious. When he's almost killed by his own father, Emi enters the duel. For the first time, she defends her son, attacks Yujiro with her fist, and stops him from further attacking their son. Her act of courage saves Baki's life, but unfortunately, Emi is murdered by Yujiro, who embraces her and breaks her spine. After the whole situation, dying Emi keeps her unconscious son on her knees and sings him the last lullaby. Later, a scene is shown in which Baki keeps his mother on her back and walks with her through the city. They talk to each other and joke like a loving family. However, after a while it turns out that it all happens only in the imagination of Baki, who in fact was going through the city alone. A police officer also stops him there, but then Detective Kido comes in and tells him to leave Baki alone. Later, Baki decides to go on a long journey to meet powerful opponents to fight. That's when he swears to himself seriously that someday he will defeat his father. Baki travels the world for 2 years and defeats various martial artists. Now he is 15 years old, and Baki finally comes to Brazil and meets Dixon. The young fighter visits him with the intention of fighting, but it turns out that the Brazilian martial artist is heavily injured and is currently in a wheelchair. Dixon tells him about the underground arena in the Tokyo Dome, and that is where he was defeated and lost everything he had in life. Nevertheless, Baki does not seem to be discouraged and decides to find the underground arena. So, soon Baki arrives in Tokyo and visits the household of Mitsunari Tokugawa. There he meets Kanji Igari for the first time. Igari is just leaving Tokugawa's house when Baki arrives. They watch each other for a while, and Baki tells him that if he wants to stand in his way, he will treat him as his enemy. Igari decides that he doesn't want to have any match and goes away. After a while, Baki defeats all the bodyguards from Tokugawa's house and then fights a duel with Shumei Kanu, the best bodyguard of the Tokugawa house. Kanu surprises Baki with his fighting style, which is based mainly on self-defense and imitating the movements of his opponents. However, he turns out to be too weak for Baki. The young fighter realizes that Kanu has a great defense, but his offense is very weak. Ultimately, Baki wins the fight, showing his offensive superiority over Kanu. After the battle, Baki meets Tokugawa for the first time and asks him for permission to join the arena. Tokugawa agrees to his request. Then the saga starts with the Shinshinkai Karate tournament at the Tokyo Budokan Arena. Baki is 17 years old now, and he has never practiced karate, so he has a white belt, but he easily reaches the finals, where his opponent is Atsushi Suedo. Before the start of the duel, Baki for the first time meets Doppo Orochi, the grandmaster of the Shinshinkai Karate. Eventually, the fight begins and Suedo, despite his great skills, has no chance of defeating Baki. At some point, Baki tells him that the only chance to defeat him is to hit him in the face, which is against the rules. Angry Suedo agrees and strikes him in the face with all his might, which breaks his own hand. Baki then quickly defeats his opponent and wins the tournament. After the fight, Doppo tells Baki that he knows the truth about him, and he realizes that this kind of strength is not gained from tournaments like this one. Later, Baki meets Kiyosumi Katu, who has watched his duel and wants to provoke him to battle. Eventually, they are interrupted by an old jujutsu master named Izu Matobe, who also wanted to meet Baki after the finals. Baki had enough of all the fuss, and he was getting out of there. He goes back to the house where he lives with his old dog Musashi. He rented this house from Kinuyo Matsumoto, who lives next door with her daughter named Kozue. So, it turns out that Baki rarely comes to school, so Kozue asks him to change it a little. That's when he tells her for the first time that his goal is to become the strongest man in the world. At school, Baki is caught by Takayama, who is a school boxing star. He's persuading Baki to fight him. Eventually, Baki agrees. But in the end, Takayama doesn't stand a chance against him. Baki then goes to the underground arena in the Tokyo Dome, where he fights every month. This time, his opponent is Kusho Shinogi, also known as the Cord Cutter. During a battle, he manages to cut Baki's hand nerve. Kusho even uses his steel fingers and cuts his right eye nerve, but Baki shows him that it's not enough to win against him. When Kusho attacks Baki with various attacks and tries to cut his left eye nerve, the young champion grabs his hand and knocks him to the ground using his submission technique. Desperate Kusho says he won't give up and wants him to break his arm. Baki gets angry and knocks him out with a powerful blow to the head from this position, instead of breaking his arm. After the fight, they meet each other, and Baki tells him that even if he broke his arm, Kusho would still fight using his legs. Kusho tells him to never lose. After leaving the arena, Baki meets Stridum, who tells him that he has seen the fight, and that Baki still has no chance against Yujiro. Sometime later, Tokugawa chooses the next opponent for Baki, and it was supposed to be Junichi Hanada. Meanwhile, Baki meets Izu Motobe and trains under his supervision. The day before the fight, Baki and Motobe found a beaten Hanada at Motobe's house. It turns out that Tokugawa decided to put Hanada to some test, which he does not pass. Eventually, during the day of the battle, Baki learns that his opponent is Mount Toba, the giant pro wrestler. At the beginning of their fight, Toba has a significant advantage. However, eventually, Baki decides to attack his limbs. Toba uses his best body drop technique, but that's not enough to beat Baki. The giant wrestler, despite his problems with his joints, decides to use this technique again. Then Baki turns the force of the impact against him, destroys his knee joint, and wins the duel. After the battle, Yujiro Hanma enters the arena. It turned out he watched the whole match. When he sees his father, Baki goes crazy and attacks him, but once again he's easily knocked out by him. Then, unexpectedly, Doppo enters, and Tokugawa organizes a fight between Yujiro and Doppo. Baki meets with Doppo and tries to persuade him to give up the fight. He says Doppo will die in this battle, but Doppo decides to invite him to a special day of Shinshinkai, in which various karate fighters have the right to come and beat him in battle. Baki is impressed by Doppo's skills, but still doubts his chances of winning against Yujiro. At some point, Baki decides to attack Doppo himself, but after a while he is completely pushed against the wall by Doppo. After their short fight, Baki changes his mind about Doppo's chances. Sometime before the fight between Doppo and Yujiro, Tokugawa tells Baki that he has found an opponent for him, which will be Kureha Shinogi, Kusho's brother, and a doctor with incredible fighting skills. Tokugawa wants their fight to take place right after the duel between Doppo and Yujiro. Finally, the day of the fight comes, and Baki is very concerned about the upcoming events. He's having a hard time focusing on his preparations for the fight in the locker room. Soon, after a great and hard battle, Doppo Orochi loses in a dramatic way. The karate grandmaster almost dies. but Kureha saves his life at the last minute. Baki is shaken up by the sight of the almost dead Doppo and is not even able to warm up before a fight. Then Kureha's ex-patients come to his locker room. They tell Baki that they gave themselves up to Kureha, who was supposed to save their lives, but he conducted his experiments on them. This message made Baki so angry that his attitude to the upcoming battle immediately changed. When he enters the ring, he is burning up and immediately attacks Kureha with a powerful bunch of blows. Kureha keeps trying to win by the strength of his muscles, but this turns out to be ineffective, so he starts to use his special techniques based on medical knowledge. Ultimately, he uses his special and powerful technique called Dashin, but eventually, Baki gets up and beats him with a Gutaijutsu punch. Kureha ends up with ruptured intestines, and after the fight, Kureha suffers terribly and the arena doctor says he needs someone with the same blood type as Kureha to save him. So after some time, Baki learns that Tokugawa is organizing a great martial arts tournament. The winner of the tournament will get a precious belt. Baki invites Kozue to go with him to the Tokyo Dome and explore his secret world. Underground, Baki meets a lot of old friends who will also take part in the tournament. In the first battle, he fights with a huge wrestler named Andreas Reagan. At first, Reagan disregards Baki because of his height, but after a while, he realizes that the young champion is a serious fighter, thanks to whom the wrestler can do his best. Anyway, Baki directly challenges him to exchange punches. He repels the opponent's attacks without many problems and wins the duel. After the fight, he meets Kozu in the hallway and talks to her. He explains to her that every young man, at least once in his life, dreams of being the strongest in the world. Also, he tells her that some people do not grow out of this dream, and that's why many people fight each other to death in places like the underground arena. When it's time for Kiyosumi Katu to fight, it turns out that his opponent is Yashazaru Jr., the son of Yashazaru. Baki states that Yashazaru Jr. should not be used as a competitor in the tournament. In Baki's opinion, the ape agreed to come to this place only to fight against Baki because he defeated his father. That's why Baki enters the fight and interrupts Katu, who by the way has no chance against the ape. At some point, even Baki is beaten up by Yasha, and then Katsumi Orochi, the adopted son of Doppo, appears. Katsumi knocks out the ape and almost kills it, but Baki interrupts. That's when a somewhat hostile relationship arises between Baki and Katsumi. Then the knocked out ape is taken to the doctor. Later in the tournament, Baki meets Hanayama and wishes him luck in his fight. But the Yakuza rejects his politeness and says he treats the tournament as a war. Later, when Katsumi brutally defeats Roland Istaz, Baki meets him again and says he doesn't like the way he deals with things. They start a short fight, but after a while, Hanayama interrupts them, hitting Baki in the face. Then, Yujiro suddenly appears in the underground of the Tokyo Dome and introduces his companion, who is called Yu Amanai, who will also take part in the tournament. At some point, Jack finds Kozue in the corridor, waiting for Baki. He starts a conversation with her and probably tries to flirt. Baki gets very mad when he sees the situation and takes a position to fight, but Jack just turns around and says he wants to see him in the tournament finals. Later after Jack's fight, Yujiro has a conversation with him in the middle of the arena. The conversation almost leads to a fight, but Baki begins to feel jealous that someone takes away his chance to defeat his father and interrupts by kicking Jack in the face. After a while, Jack whispers something to Yujiro's ear, and the ogre bursts into a mad laugh, and Baki wonders what such an important thing Jack could have said to him. In the second round, Baki challenges Zulu, a Brazilian Vale Tudo fighter. Before the fight begins, Baki kisses Kozue for the first time. Initially, Baki is attacked by surprise and knocked out by Zulu, resulting in Zulu being declared the official winner of the match. The audience starts protesting, claiming that it was unfair and that the real fight hasn't taken place yet. But Tokugawa enters the arena and says that a real fighter should always be prepared to battle, and a surprise attack is no excuse. However, when Baki gets up and wants to get out of the arena, Zulu again attacks him. This way, Tokugawa recognizes that the fight is not over yet, since both fighters still want to fight. After a short fight, Baki knocks out Zulu, but after a while, he comes up to him and gives him a hand. He's letting him know that since Zulu gave him a second chance by attacking him again, he'll do the same. Zulu gets up, and the fighters start their third round. Eventually, Baki's abilities far exceed those of his opponent, and the terrified Zulu surrenders. After the fight, Kanji Igari enters the arena, telling Baki that he intends to be his next opponent. In round 3, Baki's opponent is Kanji Igari. Before the start of the fight, Igari begs him to let him win the fight. Baki is surprised and outraged by the wrestler's behavior, so he refuses. During the fight, It turns out that it was only Igari's acting. The wrestler knew from the beginning that in a normal fight there is no chance to win against the champion of the underground arena. So he decided to use dirty methods. When Baki uses a headlock against him, Igari quietly says he gives up, but after a while, he attacks Baki by surprise. Despite their difference in strength, Igari turns out to be capable of doing Baki quite serious damage in a further part of the battle. Later in the fight, he uses even more psychological tricks. At some point, a woman dressed up as Emi Akizawa, Baki's mother, appears in the audience. Igari is doing this to confuse Baki. Eventually, Baki thanks him for seeing his mother again. Later, Baki provokes Igari and invites him to a typical pro wrestling match. Despite Igari's best efforts, Baki wins this duel using a variety of pro wrestling moves. After the fight, Igari meets Baki and has a short but very friendly conversation. In the next round, Baki's opponent is Kaiyu Retsu, a powerful Chinese Kempo practitioner. Before the start of the match, Baki trains by imagining the fight against Retsu and learning his movements from constant mock fights in his head, based on what is already seen. When the fight begins, Baki is able to survive Sunke, the most powerful Retsu technique. The young fighter again uses his special ability to release the endorphins in his brain, but it turns out that he has developed that skill to such an extent that he is able to release endorphins by simply squeezing his ear. Baki takes considerable damage during the battle, but is able to handle all of Retsu's best techniques. At the end of the duel, Hanma's blood wakes up in Baki, and he almost breaks the neck of the Chinese fighter. Baki seems to be in a murderous mood and the smile on his face resembles that of Yujiro, but after a while he starts to control himself again. Ultimately, Retsu survives but loses the battle. Yujiro meets with Baki after the battle and shows him his disappointment about Baki's merciful tenderness. Ultimately, Baki gets to the tournament final where his last enemy is his jackhammer. In the arena, Jack reveals his true identity, and it turns out that he is the brother of Baki. Both fighters shake hands and promise to do their best during the battle. Both competitors use their best techniques against each other. At some point, Jack bites an artery in Baki's hand, and he starts to bleed out slowly, but ties his hand with a bandage to reduce the blood leak. At some point, Kozui gets up from the audience and asks Baki to give up, saying that both of them have already given each other enough pain. However, the underground arena champion does not decide to give up. A tough duel continues at its best, but then suddenly something very strange happens with Jack. Jack had actually overdosed on the drugs he takes in order to increase his strength, and they began to modify his body. Quite astonishingly, the situation doesn't end their fight at all. After his overdose attack, Jack is an even stronger monster for Baki. Eventually, Baki manages to survive all his brother's crazy attacks and defeats him with the front neck lock. At this time, Baki's back muscles take on the shape of a smiling demon for a moment, just like in the case of Yujiro Hanma. In the end, Baki receives the winning belt from Tokugawa, and Jack grabs his brother's hand, raises it up, and shows respect for the tournament winner. Afterward, all the tournament participants congratulated Baki on his victory. Then, after some time, Tokugawa meets Baki and tells him that due to synchronicity, a phenomenon that combines things that supposedly have nothing to do with each other, 5 dangerous criminals are coming to Tokyo. All 5 are powerful killers who seek defeat in their life. Later on, Baki becomes the target of a school gang that wants to finish him off and organizes a few thugs to fight against Baki. The young fighter defeats them all in the blink of an eye, but suddenly Speck appears, one of the 5 convicts who came to Tokyo. Then Baki has a short skirmish with him, after which the police arrive, and then Speck voluntarily surrenders into their hands, telling Baki that he had a lot of expectations about him. Then it is shown that Baki must pass a fitness test at his school. He fails most of the tasks because he does them in the wrong way or uses too much force. He makes a hole in the track, throws the ball into the ground, jumps the whole jump away, and destroys the chin-up bar. In the end, he tries to beat the 500-meter run record, due to his tendency to make any training exercise as challenging as possible. For maximum growth, he subconsciously begins to alter his technique to tax his muscles greatly. This causes him to fail the test, but is given a pass as the teacher is able to understand why Baki began to slow down. Later, Baki meets all the convicts in the underground arena, as well as Doppo Orochi, Guki Shibukawa, Kaioru Hanayama, and Kaiyu Retsu. Everyone agrees that there is a war between the main characters and the criminals. The rules of the great battle are simple. Everyone can track down their opponent from the opposite team in every daily life situation. Shortly afterward, Baki goes on a date with Kozue, but during their another kiss, the serial killer Speck appears who wants to fight Baki. Baki notices him and gives Speck a death glare that scares even a monster like him. Speck still tries to attack, but Hanayama appears and drags Speck away without making a sound. Then another day, Baki is attacked during a school lesson by Hector Doyle, who's a criminal from England. However, Baki runs away from the scene because he doesn't want to endanger the students in the classroom and expose his status as an underground arena fighter. But literally, a moment later, he's assaulted by another killer. This time, it's Yanagi, the Japanese known as the Poisoner. At first, Yanagi attacks Baki with his sickles, but soon Shibukawa joins the duel and forms a duo against Yanagi, who pulls out the Indian claws. However, eventually, Yanagi starts to fight barehand and defeats Baki with his vacuum palm. This is Baki's first defeat since he was a child. After the fight, Baki meets everyone at Tokugawa's house. The old man is very disappointed and desperate about Baki's loss. When their conversation ends, Caillou Dorian suddenly enters the Tokugawa's house with a bucket of gasoline and a lighter in his hand. He wants to set fire to all the guests, but that's when Katsumi Orochi comes in and stops him. Later, Kozue is kidnapped by Sikorsky and Baki goes after him. Baki later discovers his father Yujiro was the one who had Sikorsky kidnap Kozue. He kicks Sikorsky out a window and appears to have killed him. But Sikorsky survived thanks to his inhuman grip strength. They fight until the police show up and Sikorsky flees by jumping out of the building. He tracks Sikorsky to his sewer lair and proceeds to brutalize him to get revenge for Kozu. Oliva then shows up and punches Sikorsky out of the building. Later, after some urging from his dad, he has sex with Kozue to get stronger. After they're done, Yanagi shows up, demanding a rematch against him. During their fight, Sikorsky shows up and the convicts team up to fight Baki. But Baki beats the crap out of both of them and then takes Kozue and flees. Later, Baki battles Caillou Ri, who accidentally cures the poisoning he received from Yanagi. He proceeds to eat a massive meal made for him by Caillou Retsu, which helps him return to his former glory. After his recovery, he talks with his father and understands that he still fears Yujiro when he is thrown into a wall. Then he fights Shusei Kaku and defeats him in just 2 seconds. Later, Baki's girlfriend Kozue is being romanced by Muhammad Ali Jr., and after Jr. challenges him, they decide to duke it out in the pit. The fact Muhammad Ali Jr. wasn't willing to put his life on the line in their match led Baki to win with a vicious beating, which almost ended up killing him. Baki is stopped by Muhammad Ali himself, who was in the audience. Afterward, Baki finally realizes he is ready to end his quarrel with Yujiro. Baki challenges him to a final battle and declares that he doesn't want to be the strongest. He just wants to beat his father. Then later, Baki kidnaps the president in order to make a request to be sent to Arizona State Prison, where Biscuit Oliva resides, who's the strongest man in America. When he enters the prison, Jun Guevara attempts to beat Oliva. The fight between Guevara and Oliva upsets Baki so much that he decides to force Oliva to become angry by sleeping next to Oliva's girlfriend, Maria. Baki decides that he wishes to become the next Unchained, succeeding in escaping the prison and attempting to make Oliva look like a less pure form of strength, causing Oliva to be angered. So Oliva finally fights Baki, and Baki decides to not use tricks and beats Oliva with nothing but pure strength, which he does. After beating Oliva, Baki is later released from the prison and goes home. Later, when Pickle is revived, Baki decides to fight Pickle after he realizes that Pickle is possibly stronger than Yujiro. During the fight, Baki uses the whip strike to hurt Pickle. He also uses his mental imaging to become a dinosaur hybrid in Pickle's eyes, which ends up surprising him. The outcome of the match between Baki and Pickle could be considered to have gone either way. Pickle is the one who was left standing after the fight with Baki, but inadvertently used a weapon in the form of a martial arts technique to beat Baki. As stated by the onlookers, a weapon is a tool used by the weak against the strong, which would make Baki the true winner of the fight for having cornered Pickle. Also, Baki is the first person to make Pickle feel fear and cover in a corner. This is most evident between the conclusion of Jack's fight and Baki's fight. Whereas Pickle saw Jack as prey, he saw Baki as a friend, or equal for the first time. Then later during the father and son fight, when Baki asks why Yujiro killed Emi, they start to have their final fight. Baki awakens the demon face not on his back but on his brain, although he is able to strike Yujiro several times, and also manages to surprise him with a powerful cockroach dash. The fight still appears to be heavily in his father's favor, which Yujiro pauses many times to give Baki time to recover and offers him fighting advice. Towards the end of their fight, Yujiro is in good shape, while Baki is severely injured and beaten, and falls unconscious. He manages to land hits while down with his fighting spirit. After a long fight, Yujiro recognizes him as his son, and the only person who could give him a real fight. So Yujiro declares Baki as the strongest creature alive. But Baki himself gives Yujiro the victory, because Yujiro was able to withstand his attacks, and could have beaten him confidently, evidenced by the fact that Baki was only barely holding himself together, while Yujiro had sustained minimal injuries, and the match ends with Yujiro essentially sharing the title of World's Strongest, as because although he had won the physical brawl, it didn't sit right with him to declare himself on another level above Baki anymore, as he had needed to try more than he ever had to in the past. So Baki continues his training even after being considered an equal by Yujiro Hanma. That's because he knows that he can't consider himself above his father. So Baki is challenged by a world-class UFC fighter. But Baki defeats him without even trying at all. It was around this time that the grave of Musashi Miyamoto was found, and he was cloned and revived in the modern era. When Baki came face to face with Musashi, he was able to notice his overwhelming skill and strength. When Baki attacks Musashi, he is able to grab Baki's leg, use him like a sword, and smash him to the ground, which knocks out Baki for 30 minutes. When he wakes up, Baki realizes that he has been defeated by Musashi, and Musashi tells him that if he wanted, he could have killed him multiple while he was knocked out. Baki then gets up and punches Musashi, which puts him on his knees for 10 minutes. And he repeats what Musashi said earlier about killing him multiple times while he was on his knees. But still, Musashi gets up and nearly defeats Baki one more time easily. But during this fight, both of them were just testing each other's strength, and they were not serious. Later, Musashi was fighting against Hanayama, and Musashi was about to kill Hanayama by a finishing blow. But that's when Baki walked in and told Musashi that if he drew out his sword, he would murder him. This also sets the hype for the upcoming battle between Baki and Musashi. So the final battle between Baki and Musashi wasn't one-sided. Both fighters were getting damaged, but then suddenly in the middle of their battle, the shaman sister of Tokugawa jumped in and released Musashi's soul from his cloned body. In simple terms, she kind of performed an exorcism on Musashi. And yes, she was also the one who placed Musashi's soul into that body in the first place. So this fight ends with Baki's victory. But yeah, it would have been interesting to see their deathmatch if Musashi's soul wasn't exorcised. So, after some time, Baki participates in a speed rock climbing competition, and he easily defeats the previous champion. He then meets with Nomi no Sukune, who also shows his skills to Baki, which also includes imagination-based sumo, which surprises Baki. Baki then goes to meet Doppo Orochi and asks about sumo. Doppo says that they are strong, and he also demonstrates a few sumo moves in front of Baki, which gets Baki excited. Soon an official match is organized between Baki and Nomi no Sukune. Nomi no Sukune turns out to be a good fighter, and Baki even pulls out his Triceratops fists against him. But their match is left unfinished this time, as Tokugawa steps in and stops their match, because this small fight with Baki organized just to test Sukune's strength. Later, Baki fights against another sumo in the tournament, and after exchanging some blows, he defeats him with relative ease. So, yeah, that's all that we have for this video, and make sure to get subscribed if you guys enjoyed the video.